prepare for A Rood Awakening.
Shalom. This is Michael Root at Ophel Gardens on Mount Moreh-Yah in Jerusalem. In the winter of 1997, I secluded myself in a cabin in the north woods of Wisconsin. For several months, I sat day and night with my feet in a sleeping bag, a reading lamp over my left shoulder, and the scriptures in my hand. I had enough beans and rice to last until spring, and my only need was to understand the instructions from my Creator and how I was to serve Him. Neither daylight nor darkness affected my schedule. I had nowhere to go, no one to see, and no one to talk to. When my eyes grew tired, I fell asleep. When I awoke, I continued to read. In the second month of my seclusion, I woke myself up as I sat bolt upright and shouted, "And He, the Messiah, will confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And He, the Messiah, will confirm the covenant with many for 1 week." I was not dreaming, and from past experience I perceived that this was a revelation from heaven. But I had no idea what this could mean. Sure, I knew that this phrase was from the 9th chapter of Daniel, but I had been raised with a completely different interpretation of this phrase. The next day, I began to study this section in Daniel. If this was a true revelation, I knew that the implications would be profound. A week later, I left the cabin to visit a minister friend in Minneapolis. He was on the phone as I entered his office, and he motioned for me to sit down. As he hung up the phone, he spun around in his chair and blurted out, "Have you ever considered that the He who confirms the covenant is referring to the Messiah and not the Antichrist? It hit me in the middle of the night last week, and I have not been able to leave it alone since." I then related my experience. I left his office more convinced, but I needed further confirmation. Less than a month later, I was in the home of the archaeologist who found the Ark of the Covenant while excavating near here in Mount Moreh-Yah. It was approaching 1 o'clock in the morning when I felt compelled to share the incident with him. When I did, he leaped out of his chair and shouted, "That is right! The Messiah is He who confirms the covenant." A week later, I was with a Messianic rabbi in Texas who confirmed that the Hebrew text and the context itself both indicate that it is the Messiah who confirms the covenant. Now I was ready to make the revelation public. Join us in the Lester Summerall television studios, where this multimedia presentation on the Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord was recorded by the Prophecy Club. This is Bible Prophecy 201. Now, episode 23 in the 26-part series on the Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord. That day shall not come except first.
The angel continues. "And in the midst of the week, He, the prince that shall come, shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he'll make it desolate, even until the consummation." Now this is the reason why that phrase in there, the people of the prince that shall come, why it again speaks of the prince that shall come, because all through the book of Daniel, it speaks of that wicked prince that shall come, the king of darkness, the king of unrighteousness. And we see that it is he, throughout the book of Daniel, is the one that causes the abomination of desolation. If there is any question about it, we see that at the Feast of Purim, that is when the Messiah himself says that when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, let he who is in Jerusalem get out of there immediately. If you're out in the field, don't come back and get a sleeping bag. If you're on top of the house, don't come down inside and get a coat. You take off on a dead run out of Jerusalem, and you better pray that your flight's not on the Sabbath day. Because you can't get a taxi, you can't get a bus. It's hard to get around on the Sabbath day because everything shuts down in the land of Israel. You better hope it's not in the wintertime, because if you don't have time to get a coat and sleeping bag, you're going to freeze. But he said, get out of there. Even if you do freeze, get out of there. And you better pray that you don't have little babies that you're nursing, or that you're pregnant in those days. Because then is going to come great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of time, no, nor ever shall be, and except those days would be shortened, there shall no flesh be saved. Man is going to bring himself to the brink of destruction, and it is going to start right here in the midst of the week, between the two Tishri tens, right dead center in the midst of that week, when the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel takes place. Now, this is very serious business. It says, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. And we'll see how those days are shortened and when they are shortened, because all these have to do with the fulfillment of the feast of the Lord. And so it is the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel that transpires in the midst of the week, that is what happens exactly 3.5 years after he, the Messiah, confirms the covenant with his people. And then 3.5 years later, we come to the 70th Jubilee. And now we're going to see how all those things fit. Because it is in the midst of the week that we see this is what the Apostle Paul speaks of. And he is writing to the believers there in Thessalonica who are undergoing a great deal of tribulation at the time. And no matter how badly they were tortured, no matter how severe the persecution, they would not buckle their knees except to the Lord himself. And their lives and the way they lived was such an inspiration to all the other believers that he wrote them and told them so, and said, and gave them words of comfort. And he said, it is a righteous act with God to repay tribulation to those who are now tribulating you. You who are now being tribulated will rest. When the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, taking vengeance. As the word says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And he said, if we're going to follow him, then take up our execution stake and follow me. They've hated me, they're going to kill me, they're going to hate, and they're going to come after you too. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. Hang in there. You overcome, and I will give you a rod of iron, and you will rule with me someday. That is his promise that he has made. And so it is a righteous act with God when he repays tribulation. And he goes on in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says that concerning the coming of the Lord and our gathering together, concerning this, I beseech you, that you are not shaken in mind or troubled neither by spirit nor by word nor by letter as from us, that the day of Christ is at hand. The whole context, the day of Christ, when he comes, relieving the pain and strain of tribulation for his saints, when he in fiery vengeance comes after those who have been persecuting his people. Concerning that day and the coming of the Lord, don't let anyone fool you or deceive you by any means into thinking the day of the Lord is imminent. At hand, King James says, at hand is anastiken, imminent, impending, close at hand, could happen at any time. Don't let anyone deceive you into thinking that you should sell everything that you have, go wrap up in bed sheets and go out and sit on a hilltop on October 8th, 1988, and they give you 88 reasons why you should do that. Or why you should wrap up in a bed sheet and sit on a hilltop in 1993 and give you 93 reasons for that. Whenever someone gives me a pagan date like October 8th, 1988, I immediately take it and throw it in the trash, because God does not run the universe on a pagan calendar. But don't be deceived by any means. For that day of our gathering together, when the pain and strain of tribulation is relieved, that day will not come, except first there come, hey, apostasia. Hey, apostasia. The rebellious stand and the man of sin is revealed. the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, proclaiming that he is God. That must go down first. There is no getting out of here until the man of sin is apocalyptoed, revealed, suddenly uncovered. And we know that he is uncovered, revealed, the abomination of desolation in the midst of the week. Nobody gets out before that transpires. There is no pre-tribulation rapture. Thus saith the Lord. There is no pre-tribulation rapture. I was a paid professional false prophet. I was paid by my denomination, raised as an ultra-dispensational pre-tribulation secret rapturist. But the Messiah never told me to paint a picture in which all of his people will be lulled to sleep thinking that we would be raptured out of here in the middle of a 5-course Sunday brunch at the country club after church.
Yeah, that's right.
He told us that there would be many who would come in his name. And those who would come in his name, and they would say that my coming is sun eleuno egizo, as it says in Luke. Sun eleuno egizo, which means eminently pressing, close at hand, could happen at any time. He said, do not follow them that come in my name and say that my coming is imminent, impending, close at hand, could happen at any time. And then he goes on and gives a whole litany of things that must transpire, including the abomination of desolation. And after that event, he says, then lift up your eyes, because your redemption draws nigh. Your redemption is sun eleuno egizo. It is now imminently pressing. It could happen now after the abomination of desolation. And so I'm here to tell you tonight, even though I know it is hard for many people to hear this, but I realize that someday I'm going to be standing before the throne of Almighty God. The judge is going to be sitting up there, and he is going to look down on me and say, you said, I said, what? And so very seldom will I say, the Lord told me, or thus saith the Lord. Because I know that one day he's going to say, you said, I said, what? And I'm going to have to answer to him. And on this, I will say that I was a professional paid false prophet, denominational false prophet, and I will not speak a lie anymore. I will not set a snare in front of my brothers and sisters in which they are thinking life is going to go on smoothly until we're out of here in a pre-tribulation rapture. It is not going to happen. There is no pre-tribulation rapture, thus saith the Lord. And that's why the book, The Mystery of Iniquity, the legal prerequisites to the return of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Because when the Lord dealt with me on these things, then I knew I was required to open my mouth. I was very specifically commanded concerning this, and after a long time of weeping, realizing that as soon as I open my mouth on this, I'm going to lose all of my friends. And after all of the verifications came to where I could no longer sit still and not speak out, I then wrote the book, I opened my mouth, and I lost all my friends. But I have many more friends since then. Amen. Many more friends who are dealing with reality, who are not living a fairy tale, who want to walk with the power of God during this time and be lights to the world. Not people that want to get out of here, not cowards, not people that want to continue living life as it is, but people that want to go back to the faith once delivered to the saints. And this is where we are, and that's to whom the book of Revelation was written, and that is what will open up. Now we get to the final chart in our calendar, which is called the Countdown to the Seventh Millennium and the Confirmation of the Covenant. Subtitled The 70th Shavua, or Week of Daniel, the Covenant Confirmed, the Covenant with Death Annulled, the anti-Messiah revealed, the resurrection of the saints, and the reign of Messiah upon the earth. And to begin on this, we'll go right down to the bottom of this particular chart to see something that we have all lived through, this particular prophecy, which I believe has come to pass in these days. And this is dealing with what transpired on September 13th, 1993, the day on which Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser Arafat, Bill Clinton, representing the United Nations through the United States, met in the Rose Garden in Washington, D.C., and with about 3,000 witnesses present, they then signed the Oslo Peace Accord. Oslo, of course, in the Hebrew meaning the toilet seat, which I believe is very appropriate because that accord is about to be flushed. And it is the Oslo Accord that was signed, and that is the day that Israel entered into, at this point, a covenant in which violated God's covenant with Abraham. A covenant with death is what Isaiah speaks of. Isaiah in the 28th chapter says that Israel's leaders would do wickedly against the covenant. Remember, God made a covenant with Abraham and his offspring, that a parcel of land from the river Euphrates all the way to the river Nile was theirs, and it was given by a covenant of God forever. And we also see that Isaiah prophesied of a time that Israel would become a nation in one day. And we see that when Israel became a nation in one day, that what transpired is that 8 days later, that they were attacked, the bloodshed began on the 8th day of Israel's new life, and that 8th day is when the male child is circumcised. And at the end of that battle, Israel got more land back than what they were originally given. In 1967, Israel was attacked again, given just weeks for their survival by the world military strategist, but yet, after 6 days, Israel got more land back, including the entire Sinai Peninsula, and they went all the way to the river Nile in Egypt. For the first time, they got more land back. In 1973, Israel was attacked on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. At the end of that war, in which Israel was given only a couple of weeks for its survival, Israel got more land back. Now we do see a pattern going on here, don't we? God made a covenant with Abraham, and he put Abraham to sleep, signifying it wasn't even up to Abraham's strength to keep that covenant. God would keep it. But Israel's leaders have done wickedly against that covenant, and they've entered into an agreement with hell and a covenant with death, which is spoken of in the 28th chapter of Isaiah, in which they have given land over to the enemy, over to the United Nations, over to the Philistines for the promise of peace. God calls that an agreement with hell, a covenant with death. They entered into it on September 13th, 1993, and Yasser Arafat is now saying that he will proclaim the Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital on September 13th of 2000, exactly 7 years to the day from when Israel entered into that covenant, according to the pagan calendar. I maintain that God does not run the universe or fulfill his prophecies according to any pagan calendar, or even the Jewish calendar, which can be days and sometimes an entire month off, which it is this year. I maintain that God rules the universe and fulfills his feast on his days, whether we recognize it or not. Time will tell. But September 13th, 1993 happened to be Tishri 1, 5994, the Day of Trumpets. The Day of Trumpets, and we've seen throughout history, the Day of Trumpets is the day that the announcements are made. The Day of Trumpets is when the Ten Commandments, the Torah, was given. The Day of Trumpets is the Messiah's birth, the great sign announcing the Messiah's birth 15 days later at the Feast of Tabernacles. And this coming up, Tishri 1 that's coming up, is going to be 7 years from when Israel entered into that covenant with death. Isaiah said God will annul their covenant with death. In order to annul that covenant with death, then God would have to act within the parameters of that covenant In other words, if it's a 7-year covenant and he's going to annul it, you would think that he would have to annul it within the parameters of the original covenant. It was this last May when we were in Israel that we knew that something very significant was going on, that one of Israel's former leaders had left the country during the revised or the accarized Feast of Unleavened Bread, and was meeting up in Europe. What came out of that meeting was an acknowledgement that there was going to be very soon a summit that was going to be called, in which the United States would call in the Israeli leaders and the Palestinian leaders, and what was at stake fits along these lines. That several years ago, it was said that there were 100 suitcase-sized nuclear warheads that were unaccounted for in the Russian arsenal. And according to the intelligence that we have on this, Yasser Arafat told Yasser Arafat told Bill Clinton, according to these sources, that they had purchased 3 of these backpack nukes. Very short time after that, then some bunkers were found in the land of Israel, and it was filled with military equipment from Russia. Immediately after that is when Arafat went up to Russia, and this is just, we're speaking all current events at the time of this taping, and it was at that time that he went up to Russia, and I watched the news conference that was going on there, and that is when the statement came from the Russians that the U.S. has been ineffective in bringing about a peace agreement after 7 years. Ineffective, and that they were going to call for a new summit, and who they were suggesting to bring into the summit were all outspoken opponents to Israel, enemies of Israel. And then, after that statement was made, that's when Yasser Arafat flew to China. And then in the papers, the day after he was there, it says that the Chinese have now endorsed Yasser Arafat's claim for Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. I was just called a few days ago, and it was on national television, that there were 3 suitcase nukes that were missing from the Russian arsenal. Now, we always watch what happens in the news, because it was a couple of years ago that they said that there were 100 unaccounted for. Now, just within the last couple of weeks, to have it come across on national news that there are 3, the number 3, that are missing, and that was the exact number that was given to one of Israel's former leaders, and that the United States has verified that that is what Arafat has. I believe that they are again letting us know what is happening and what they are about to do. Now, the only reason that you would ever have a full-scale invasion of Israel take place, the only way it could happen in this short amount of time, is as if the condition existed that Arafat would do something extremely stupid. And I think that history has shown that he is entirely capable of that. And what that extremely stupid move would be is to do something that would cause the nation of Israel to strike out and to come down with 1,000,000 tons of lead on their enemies immediately. If the Palestinians and the Arabs around them, which now the Jordanians and just the last bit have been doing demonstrations just on the other side of Jordan. The Hezbollah has been flaring up. They have just had another preemptive strike in the land of Israel against bin Laden and some of his group over there. And we are not seeing much in America, but over there the tensions are building at this point. And it's going to come to the place that when they make their move, Israel is going to come down with all of their might, and it is going to shake things up. When the 39th Scud hit the land of Israel, Tel Aviv area, during the Gulf War, that is when Israel put the F-16s on the tarmac loaded with nukes and said, if one more, told Hussein, if one more Scud is launched, we are going to nuke Baghdad into a smoking black hole on planet Earth. And that's why not one more Scud was launched. It's not that the U.S. Patriot missiles did such a great job that he just gave up and said, we're not going to waste any more time or money on this project. No, Israel said, we're going to nuke you. And since there are only 3 types of nuclear warheads that have been created on planet Earth, and all 3 were developed by Jews, Kohanim, priests of Israel. See, if you don't have those guys on the Temple Mount doing service on the Temple Mount, they get into all sorts of weird stuff. But when they say that they're going to nuke you, then you ought to listen up. And Hussein did. And so what we saw at that time is it stopped. It froze the action right there because they knew Israel would do it.
Since the recording of this seminar, Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda entourage hit the United States with a very destructive terrorist attack. The 2 man-made mountains of brass, of which the prophet Zechariah spoke, came plummeting to the ground, releasing the war machines that brought the United States into an Armageddon scenario in the Mideast. The excitement has just begun. Hold on to your seat. The fulfillment of the fall feast of the Lord may be just around the corner. We invite you to join us again next time for episode 24 in the 26-part series on the Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, Jerusalem, a cup of trembling for all nations. This is Michael Rood from Jerusalem, bidding you shalom, peace, and I'll see you when the smoke clears.